Good morning friends and welcome back to NPTEL online certification course on public speaking. Dear friends, you might all well remember that in the previous lectures we had been talking about the various facets of nonverbals, and today we are going to touch upon the last facet or the last type of nonverbal communication, that is meta communication. On most of the occasions, whenever you hear the word meta communication, you have several questions in your mind as to what meta communication could be. Is it another form of nonverbal communication? Yes, you have guessed it right. Meta communication, in one word, can be the sum and substance of all sorts of nonverbal communication. But then why I need to do it separately as a lecture has got some purpose. Of course, we have touched upon kinesics, proxemics, chronemics, paralanguage, but then nonetheless meta language is also very important. Now today we will see what could come under meta communication and why this is so important. On several occasions you might have found that even though a speaker speaks, there are certain things that he leaves for the audience to extract. I mean, not everything can be said only in words. Even when we leave some gaps, even when some amount of space is left, even when we leave or we bring a sort of variety in terms of our style, in terms of our tone, in terms of our voice, as the other day we had discussed, we find that that has also got some meaning into it. Now here you can take one observation by Wick, who in his book Pragmatics of Human Communication, he actually said something which is very important from the point of view of meta communication. Now let us read these in order to understand the nitty-gritty of meta communication. What Paul Wojciechowski in his book says is, when we no longer use communication to communicate, but to communicate about communication, as we inevitably must in communication research, then we use conceptualizations that are not part of but about communication. This is called meta communication. So in one word, what we derive out of this is meta communication is actually a sort of communication about communication. Now, isn't it a very puzzling thing that we are talking about communication and then we say communication about communication is called meta communication? Actually, it is a new order of communication that arose in the evolution of mammals and that explains some distinctively complex, creative and deeply paradoxical qualities of social interaction. So when we talk about meta communication, as we have been saying that it is communication about communication, now most of us would rather be interested to know how this was introduced, who introduced it. Actually, Gregory Bateson and Jürgen Rush introduced the term meta communication in 1951 in their book The Social Matrix of Psychiatry. The full title of the book is Communication, the Social Matrix of Psychiatry. And this term meta communication, according to these two authors, means communication about communication. In fact, it refers to one's ability to convey multiple messages simultaneously. Now, we have been saying and we have also been seeing that when we make use of a word, we have a meaning, but since human beings are very complex creatures, at times when they use a word, they also might be having some other meanings which can be considered to be a sort of implicit meaning which he does not explain clearly. Now, meta communication is a form of communication on meaning making. That is why we at times say that do not try to extract the verbal meaning only. Rather, a sentence can have some hidden meanings also, and this actually requires a sort of proper interpretation. My dear friends, of course, when we look at animals, the way they interact with each other, we find and we observe that that has got a meaning. But then human language is very complex, and with the same word at times we try to please a person, on other occasions we try to displease a person. At times the same word may be a compliment, and the same word can also be a sort of paradox. The same word can also be a sort of sarcastic remark. Now, what could be the components of meta communication? I mean, when two people, we have already been saying in previous lectures that communication results out of two people, out of two persons interaction, but then there are other things also which are associated, which perhaps at times we do not take into consideration, but that has got some meaning. Of course, when we talk about the components of meta communication, we find that it can be used in spoken, where it is spoken, isn't it, where it is communicated through words, but at times it can be implicit also. For example, if you are an avid reader and if you can read in between the lines, no, from grammar you can find that several sorts of signposts or marks of punctuation, they actually provide some more meaning to a particular sentence. And of course, when it is in spoken form, non-verbals, as we have been saying, they are at times explicit, they are at times implicit also. And in order to draw the meaning, in order to extract the meaning, there is actually a negotiation between the speaker and the receiver, between the speaker and the listener, and of course, the role of ambience, the role of surrounding, the role of the tone of voice, the role of other features also cannot be denied, my dear friend. So, negotiation happens between these three realms, and each realm may support, at times it may support, but at times it may also contradict the communication which is established by another. That is why when we shall be doing negotiation, I will perhaps discuss in detail how one has to be very careful at each and every action of the communicator, I mean the other person's change of face, change of tone, change of voice, and of course the venue. Now, let us also try to have some examples of meta communication. In this regard, mention may be made of Stephen Tyler's book, which is entitled Said and Unsaid. Look at the title of the book, it is very beautiful, poetic rather. So, Stephen Tyler in his book Said and Unsaid illustrates certain examples of meta communication which can at times be direct and at times be indirect. Now, on the one hand, in this table you can find, on the one hand there are examples of direct which can be said. On the other hand, you find there are indirect expressions which cannot be said. Now, say for example, if somebody says, I am only joking, this is serious. When I say X, I mean Y. This is only hearsay. Fine. I heard that. I am speaking to you as a friend, but there are certain, the same sentences are there, but these sentences also leave room for some unsaid, for some indirect. What are they? Tone of voice, the way you said, I am only joking. Fine. Intonation, fine. This is serious. This is serious. Is this serious? Fine. And then comes gestures, postures, the movement of the eyes, and of course, your facial expressions, which we have already discussed in our lecture on kinesics. Now, this meta communication actually gives rise to meta language. Now, how this meta language came into being? The famous logician Alfred Tarski introduced the term meta language in the year 1933. Like meta communication, this meta language also employs the employment of language to understand better about language. What is said, but what is not said also has got some language. In meta language, language actually comes out of a means of communication, I mean through the process, to the region that is the cause of communication in itself. It actually comprises grammar. That is why if you really want to have a taste of meta communication, listen to the dialogues in a movie, in a theater, in a play, and you can find sometimes even though the character speaks only half sentence, at times the character murmurs, but that also has got a meaning. So, grammatical knowledge helps participants to have a proper grip on meta-linguistic abilities. That is why you might have found that in a play, different characters speak differently, but then as readers we understand the meaning the way the dialogues have been delivered. Now, we can also explore something about meta communication in Indian background. Tarski's concept of meta language was also introduced to the field of Indian logic and grammar in the year 1962. In this regard, various scholars like Stahl and Sharp juxtapose meta language with Panini's grammar for critical study. Stahl argues that the ideas of meta communication had been there since ancient times in Indian discourses, and the examples can be best found when there is a sort of upadesa or instructions, the language of grammatical instruction, isn't it? You find that when the richas of Vedas, when they are pronounced, it is actually said the way they are pronounced, they actually lend meaning to it. And then comes Anubandh, that is meta-linguistic marker. You can find in most of the Indian scriptures there are different types of meta markers which actually tell the readers as to what could be the possible meanings or why there is a break, why there is a continuity, why there is an aberration. So, all these actually have a great role to play in terms of communication. Now, when we talk about meta communication and we have a look at the theorists, they actually say that in order to understand something effectively or to get the effective meaning of a particular say thread of thought or a particular sentence, content is very important, relationship is very important, context is very important. Let me give you an example. If somebody asks you, are you going to join me for the theater today? And the response that comes, I have to appear at an examination tomorrow. Now, let us look at this exchange. What do we find? We actually find that while in the first speaker's speech there is a sort of invitation, in the second one's who replies, we find that there is a sort of decline, there is a sort of refusal, but then he does not make use of any negative. Now, how did you come to know it? He simply provides you the reason that he has his examination or his papers tomorrow. The meaning is, and how the speaker comes to get the meaning out of it, the speaker actually extracts out of the context, meaning thereby for him this time is not for examination, because this time is not for revelry, for rejoicing. So, the content denotes the meaning that the verbal and the non-verbal codes signify. And of course, on many occasions you might have found that the relationship matters a lot, and during these relationships, I mean two people who are intimately related, distantly related, closely related, sometimes they provide you some sort of indications or markers even when they make use of words, but in a very implicit manner. Now, in this regard, it would rather be very pertinent if we can take Woljowicz's expression or quote when he says, every communication has a content and a relationship aspect such that the latter, I mean the relationship, classifies the former and is therefore a meta communication. I have already given you an example, my dear friends, and you might have been able to extract. Now, when we talk about meta communication, as I have been saying, that it is communication about communication, and if we can take this word literally, it means beyond communication. Meta is beyond and communication is communication. So, there can be so many things which can lend meaning to it. Imagine you are going for a presentation, you are well prepared in terms of content, but then you do some other preparation also, you choose a particular dress, you also think of the venue, you also think of the acoustics, and you time and again you practice your own voice as to when your voice will go up and when the voice will come down, or when you will try to maintain a sort of neutrality in order to drive home your point. So, in this regard, you can find that especially the novice speakers who are not trained to make use of meta communication, they perhaps do not attach any importance to all these things. What they simply do is they actually remember everything and they want to vomit it out in a presentation, but then they should realize that there are other meta communicative features which will work, namely silence. Silence is communication, my dear friends, you realize it or not, because silence speaks a lot. Silence sometimes speak more than words can. So, activity or inactivity, as Woljowic says, words or silence all have got message value. They influence, of course. If we have to add to these three realms of meta communication, silence occupies an integral part of conveying meaning. If I refer to one of the previous lectures where I said silence ignites, silence conceals, silence reveals, silence voices, silence rejoices. My dear friends, when you are giving a presentation or speaking in public, silence has got an upper hand at times. If a person does not know how to situate silence and pauses in his talk, perhaps he will be a great bore, and the listeners to time and again keep looking at their wristwatches as to when the time should come to an end, so that they may get relieved of this sesquipedalian lecture. Even the physical stillness of the speaker, if you are a little bit silent, at times gets attributed to postural silence. Some communication theorists find the meaning generated by silence direct, while others appreciate the meaning of silence in its ambiguity. As I said, silence can be interpreted sometimes very positively, sometimes it can be understood in a very negative manner. But nowadays, especially among the youngsters, they cannot bear silence, they cannot tolerate silence, and hence they are not able to understand the meaning of silence. Rather, they become so impatient thanks to technology, thanks to computers, thanks to internet. Now, another important feature of meta communication are pauses. I have already stated in one of the lectures that if you take a short break, it becomes a pause, and the break becomes longer, it becomes silence. In public speaking, pauses are employed to emphasize and add weight to the content delivered. One cannot speak continuously, spontaneously, because one has always to keep into consideration the audience's receptivity, and that is why pauses become a must. Pauses can benefit both the speaker as well as the listeners. As I have been saying, the speakers get a breathing time and the listeners get a time to relate, a time to understand. Pauses provide time space to the speaker to avail more precision in their choice of words. Both silence and pauses, they are integral part of active listening. You might have found when we were discussing listening, we had already said that those who can listen better only can speak better, isn't it? So, if you really want to involve yourself into active listening, pauses are essential. Pauses of the speakers, fine. When the speaker cares to listen to the questions or suggestions from the other end. In an offline classroom, you might have realized that when a teacher poses a question, the teacher suddenly stops, waits for the answer, and this actually gives a thinking time to the listeners. So is the case when we give a presentation or a talk. So, providing them with a momentary relief, let me call it a sort of comic relief for them. If the entire part is so boring, as a speaker, you can provide some momentary reliefs to your audience members. Now, in all these silence and pauses and other meta communicative features, there is a sort of meta message, and this meta message has to be extracted or analyzed very carefully, because there is an underlying meaning. A meta message is, since in poetry you can find this is actually the best way, where you will find the poets throw some words and then you can find the gaps, and the gaps speak, and the gaps mean, isn't it? So, it could be understood when read between the lines. You might have realized when you might be reciting a poetic piece, very beautifully the speaker or the person reciting provides or makes a beautiful use of silence and pauses. It also, especially in presentations and talks, it also tells you the attitude and the feelings of the speaker. So, when we simply provide the message, we provide them the literal message, but when we are conscious of leaving something as a sort of meta communication, this meta communication or meta message is an implied meaning. We have already discussed how in different cultures silence and pauses are treated differently. A silence can be unnerving in many countries for many people, whereas silence can be a sort of acceptance in many countries. But then it may vary, my dear friend, depending upon the context, depending upon the situation, depending upon the topic. Now, can we really, as speakers, control meta message? Of course. There are certain factors that can help you have a control over meta message. When you prepare a talk or a speech or say any situation of public speaking, you have to keep all these things into consideration. The very first thing is environment. My dear friends, in public speaking you get different occasions, different opportunities, but remember, it is actually the environment that will add to. That is why when some political negotiations go on, they think of the weather, they think of the venue, they think of the design of the room, they also think of the weather, and they also think of the physical arrangement of furniture as well. So, environment is one important ingredient of controlling meta message. Then comes behavior. the behavior of the speaker, isn't it? Then comes the skills, how you are going to say something. No? A positive message also explained or told with a squint eye can be negative. With a distorted voice can be negative. Then comes needs. Do you really need this sort of meta message, and then appeal, and then beliefs. So, all these factors are the controlling factors which can help you provide a sort of meta message. Now, let me here bring one critique. Derrida, most of the English people, I mean those who are associated with English literature and also with philosophy and sociology might have well listened to the name of Derrida. So, Derrida's graphemic structure of communication, where this philosopher, this French philosopher, critiques the viewpoint of perceiving communication as a solely phonocentric. He says that it is not only phonocentric. I mean, what you hear only is not the truth. It is not only the sound. Rather, what he says is that it essentially incorporates a structure of writing for itself, which he calls graphemes. Graphemes. So, graphematics, he refers to graphematics, and then it is actually a field of studying writing systems and their basic components. That is why you might have found that when some diplomatic letters are written, every word is put in a very controlled manner, because words mean no doubt, words are tricky no doubt, but as a speaker or as a user you have to be trickier. So, writing as a communicative system always supplements the verbal part, and meta communication, according to Matthias, it based itself on communication. It is not possible to turn communication discrete. It is not possible to turn communication discrete. So, what is of importance is that you have to, according to Derrida, you have to understand that only one cannot perceive communication simply as phonocentric, rather it can also depend much on graphemes. Nowadays, since we are living in a very advanced technological age, where meta communication has also entered digital medium, and none but the youngsters, they know well how they are making use of these meta communication, because we are living in an age of emojis, fine, where when they converse there are symbols that speak more. Communication through texting, because we are talking about graphemes here. So, communication through texting platforms such as Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and many more, they actually have a lot of room for meta communication. You will find that even when you use emails, electronic mails, it is said that if somebody writes everything in capitals, means he is shouting, fine. Youngsters especially believe that if they do not provide an emoji in their text, perhaps it will result in a sort of disinterestedness. Nowadays there are several emojis, several symbols, people greet each other every day, and they skip salutations and greetings in email, fine, and that at times becomes very rude, isn't it? So, leaving people's text unread signifies virtual silence. You might have found that on platform like WhatsApp, if you send a message, you immediately or lately get to know. How do you get to know that your message has been read? It is once again with the help of the meta communication, when you provide some marker and it is digital, my dear friends. Now, we should also understand how one should use meta communication properly in public speaking. One has to be totally aware of one's meta communicative approach, which actually makes the overall transmission of the intended message fluent, smooth and effective. One cannot or should not rather judge any message in isolation. One should actually judge a message in totality. That is why it actually provides you, meta communication provides you a lot of thoughts. The proper combination of intended words and then certain cues that you leave, isn't it? Once upon a time, handwriting used to be a marker of the person's mood, temperament, intention and whatsoever. Fine. But nowadays we are living in a different age where people do not write, where people simply text, and in texting also we come to know about their attitudes and beliefs with the help of this meta communication. Interests, feelings and emotions could also be transferred well through effective meta communication, as we have already witnessed. Language and paralanguage, we have already talked about paralanguage. Language and paralanguage, they actually go hand in hand for establishing better communication. Hence, meta communication is very important, my dear friend. So, we have already discussed today how whenever you are sending a message or whenever you are speaking in public speaking situations, one has to be particularly aware of the sort of meta communicative signals as a speaker, and not only as a speaker, you can also get the same from the receivers, who also through their meta communication they provide you their feedback and tell you, dear Mr. X, why are you wasting your time too much? You have already exceeded the time limit. The moment you find them glancing over their wristwatch, the moment you find them touching each other, the moment you find them raising their eyebrows, and the moment you also find them looking at the speaker continuously without break, you need to understand the meta communicative message that they really want to get rid of now. So, meta communication plays a very significant role in communication process, and especially as a non-verbal, meta communication has a lot to say. So, before I come to wind up this talk, let me once again make a mention of Paul Watzlawick, an Austrian American psychologist, who says one cannot not communicate. Meaning is that whether you write, speak, or you become idle, you remain silent, every now and then you are communicating. You are never idle, you are always communicating through meta communication. Thank you very much. I hope you have been able to understand the importance of meta communication, and the next lecture we shall once again take up something new. Thank you very much. I wish you all a good day.